Hey guys, it's Giada, and we are in my home kitchen in Los Angeles. And today we're gonna make double chocolate holiday biscotti. And although some people think it's a little tricky to master biscotti, I'm here to show you that it's not. It's pretty easy. You need a little bit of patience and a little bit of time because you are gonna bake these twice. That's the secret to biscotti, but they're gonna be totally worth it. So what you wanna do before you start is just get a half a stick of butter at room temperature so it's nice and soft. I've already lined my baking sheet with a little parchment and I dusted it with about a quarter cup of flour because I'm gonna need it later when I form my first log. I brought my eggs to room temperature as well. And before I forget, make sure you preheat your oven before you start, 350 degrees. That way when you put the cookies in, they're ready to bake. All right, let's get started. So we've got our butter, our half a stick of butter that's already come to room temperature. And to it, we're gonna add half a cup of sugar. Plain old granulated sugar. There we go. Oh, and one more thing about the butter, it should be unsalted butter. I always bake with unsalted butter. That way you can control how much salt goes in there. There we go. And we're also going to add a quarter cup of orange marmalade. So these are going to have a chocolate and orangey kind of flavor combo, which I think is spectacular. And it's even more spectacular during the holidays. I think that the orange and the chocolate reminds me of being a kid. We did a lot of orange chocolate combo cakes and cookies. So we're gonna add a quarter cup of the jam right in there. And there's little pieces of actual orange peel as well. So it gives it a little bit of a bite in the jam itself. Then, speaking of oranges, we're going to zest 2 whole oranges. We need about a tablespoon of orange zest. And really the orange zest perfumes the cookies. That's pretty much the job of it, so that when they're baking, you can smell it, and when you take them out of the oven, you can smell it, and every time you take a bite, the first thing you do is smell a cookie, and it smells like orange, which is fantastic. And orange and chocolate is a huge sort of pairing, a very popular combination all over the world, truly. There we go. There's one orange, and we'll do the next. And you want to make sure that when you're zesting any citrus that you only zest the skin up to right here. So once it starts to change, the texture and color of the orange or the lemon or the lime changes, you want to stop zesting because you don't want the pith of the citrus because that becomes bitter. You just want ever so slightly to just zest just the top of it. It smells really good. Okay, so now that we've got all of the orange zest in there, we need half a teaspoon of salt. Again, we use salt when we bake just to sort of bring out the flavors of the ingredients and to make sure that the sugar flavor is balanced. Okay, so now that we've got all that in there, we're gonna start mixing this all together until you get sort of a nice creamy mixture. And it's known as creaming sugar and butter together, really, just like you would in making chocolate chip cookies. So same kind of idea. Okay, so we've creamed together the butter, the sugar, and the orange, marmalade and orange zest. Now, time to add 1 egg at a time. The egg's gonna bind these cookies together. And the whole idea of biscotti in Italian, it means, bis means 2 times. If you were just gonna translate the Italian word, biscotti, it means twice baked. So that's why they're twice baked. And a lot of times, these kind of cookies, a long, long time ago in Italy, were cookies that were baked really with just very little flavor. A lot of times just fennel, dried herbs, and then the sailors would take them on the boats from the ships. when they were gone for long periods of time, these cookies lasted and lasted and lasted, and that's really where the history of the biscotto came from. And then we ended up adopting it as the word for cookies in general. So it's a fun little historical fact. Okay, one egg at a time, so egg number 2. So biscotto is one cookie, one of these. Biscotti is multiple cookies. It's the plural. Like panino and panini, same idea. All right, egg number 3. So now that we've got the eggs in, we want to add a 1/4 cup of cocoa powder. And remember to start slowly when you add cocoa powder to something, because otherwise you could potentially be wearing the cocoa powder. So it's so fine. And unsweetened, you want to use unsweetened cocoa powder, because otherwise the cookies the biscotti become too sweet. Rich, chocolatey cocoa powder. That's why they're called double chocolate biscotti, because we're using cocoa powder and we're also going to use chocolate chips. All right, cocoa powder's in. Next, 2 cups of flour. And again, when you measure flour, make sure that you really level it off so that you're using the exact amount that you need. When it comes to baking, it's a precise sort of technique you need to use, because otherwise you're not going to get the right texture in the end. And we need 1½ teaspoons of baking powder. The baking powder will help them rise ever so slightly, although these are pretty thin cookies after we cut them. That's 1/2 teaspoon. And this is 1. There we go. It also helps keep the cookies tender, so they're not too dry. But traditionally they were so dry that you would have to dip them in something, coffee or tea, in order to soften them up. Nowadays, we add whatever we want into them and we make them slightly less dry. All right, so just mix all this together, allowing the flour to absorb. You can raise the speed a little bit. Even when I add flour, I start on the low speed and then I slowly raise the speed. Again, because I don't really want to wear all the flour on me. I want it to be in the cookie, in the batter. Alrighty, so now we're done with the hand mixer. We're gonna just tap these guys. And we are going to fold in with a rubber spatula. We're gonna fold in some chocolate chips. I just wanna make sure I mix all of the ingredients up here. Make sure they're all in there. Sometimes you just also want to scrape the bottom of the bowl and make sure all the flour in the bottom of the bowl is mixed in, because every once in a while the mixer doesn't get down there. So you just want to make sure it's all mixed together. You can see it's really pretty. And we're going to add 1 cup of bittersweet chocolate chips. If you prefer using milk chocolate chips or semi-sweet, you can definitely do that. I like mine more on the dark chocolate flavor side. So, and I like dark chocolate with orange, so that's why I chose to do these. But you can definitely use whatever kind of chocolate chips you like. There we go. Just kind of mix it in. You want to use a spatula for this because otherwise the chocolate chips will break with the mixer. So you just want to fold them in. There we go. So now that they're folded, I'm going to get rid of this because I need room for my baking sheet. And I've got my baking sheet. And I lined it with a parchment, but I also sprinkled a little flour. And the only reason I did that is because the flour is going to help me manage with the sticky dough. Because you can see that the dough is pretty sticky and we have to form a log about 13 inches long and 3 inches wide. So what I like to do is kind of just add 3 big like lumps right there. And then you can start sort of forming your log with right there. Here we go. So now, perfect. Get all of that off. And then I just get my hands a little bit filled with, when I get a little flour on my hands, so it becomes less tacky and less sticky. And what you want to do is kind of form it into a log. It's nice too to do it with your hands because that way you can kind of figure out as well the texture of the dough. You know, I think baking, a lot of times the more you bake a dish, the easier it becomes to understand what it's supposed to look like and feel like. So I think touching your ingredients and kind of feeling them and forming them with your fingers is a great way for you to learn, oh, this is what it should be like. So, you know, it's part of the experience of baking. All right, so now that we've formed the log, it's kind of like a Yule log, same idea. I'm gonna wash my hands and you're gonna hit pause, wash your hands, put this in the oven at 350 degrees for about 35 minutes. Then let it cool, and I'll meet you here to cut these babies up and rebake them. So my log has baked for 35 minutes at 350, and I let it cool on the baking sheet for another 30 minutes. Now that it's completely cooled, time to cut it. So we're gonna just take it off the baking sheet, as you can see, and it gets nice and dry and cracks. So don't worry when it cracks. It's supposed to crack. That's the whole point. And you're supposed to be able to handle it. Kind of looks like a nice thin ciabatta or something. That's kind of what I think it looks like anyway. And now we're gonna bake it again for another 20 to 25 minutes. So this is the key here. You're gonna take a serrated knife, because it's much easier to cut it with a serrated knife, and you're gonna cut it on the diagonal. So that way you can cut them straight, and some people do, but it looks fancier and prettier, especially if you're gonna give it away for the holidays, to cut it on the diagonal. There we go. So there's the edge. Put that there. And you're gonna cut them in about half-inch pieces, and you wanna put them cut side down back on the tray. You can see all the chocolate chips in there. Basically, it's like just cutting, you know, a baguette on the diagonal when you make crostini. It's sort of the same idea. There we go. And it's funny because a lot of Italians, they all have sort of their own way of doing these. Some of them like them super thin. Others of them like them thick. Some of them like them skinnier, like they would say this log is too wide. Like it's kind of like red sauce, you know? It's sort of the same idea. Everybody's got their own traditions from their families. None are right, none are wrong. It just depends on how you made them. And I always say I'm not going to argue with grandma's recipe. So however you want to make them size-wise, do it. There we go. Do this one instead. There we go. And the two little ends, we can kind of just fit them in there. They're not going to spread, so we just need to fit them in there somewhere. All right, we're gonna pop these back into a 350-degree oven. So push pause, put your biscotti back in the oven at 350 degrees for another 20 to 25 minutes, and then I'll meet you back here and we can taste them together. So my cookies have cooled, and I like to either cool them on a cooling rack or cool them on a baking sheet if you don't have a cooling rack. But you want to make sure that they're cooled before you handle them because they have chocolate and they get hot. And honestly, I think this is so cute. So what we do a lot of times is you can put them, a couple of them, in a little cellophane baggie, and again, you can give them as gifts, you can give them to your neighbors. It's just a sweet little touch. And who wouldn't want to get a little biscotto from a neighbor or from a student? I think they're really fun. You can dip them in coffee or dip them in tea, or you could just eat them straight like I do. Crunchy, loads of chocolate. I taste the orange, zest, and jam in here. In my opinion, these are absolute perfection. Thanks for joining me, you guys. I hope that you make these and you enjoy them as much as I do. See you next time.